I'm the lead for the communications, events, and partnerships team. We are the World Bank Y2Y community, and I'm glad to have everyone here today. I have my colleague Inez, who will be moderating this session with me for the global audience. I look forward to reflecting with you on how education is key to empowering youth to become the leaders of tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Gigi, and hi, everyone. My name is Inês Silva Araújo, and I'm joining you today from Portugal. I'm a communications lead at the Communications, Events, and Partnerships team of the World Bank Group Youth to Youth community, and I'm glad to be here today and introduce you to this preeminent lineup of speakers to talk about the importance of education and how this key topic will define the future of the generations to come. At Y2Y, we really believe in the power of young people to create the future we deserve. We are a community of young professionals at the World Bank Group who provide a reservoir of fresh ideas and perspectives to contribute to the World Bank Group's vision of achieving a world free of poverty and the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals. Our mission is to engage, inspire, and empower youth within and outside the World Bank Group.
When it comes to education, the World Bank Group plays a key role in this sector. As the largest financier of education in the developing world, the World Bank works on education programs in more than 80 countries and calls for access to quality education and learning opportunities for all by 2030. Before introducing our speakers, I'd like to kindly remind you that you can use the chat box to share your thoughts and impressions during the event, and that the panel discussion will be followed by a 10-minute Q&A session. Our first speaker is the Executive Director of DC-based nonprofit For Love of Children, which provides educational support and services beyond the classroom to children regardless of their social or economic status. Please join us in welcoming Brandolyn Anderson.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Gigi, and thank you so much for having me this morning. I am very excited to tell you a little bit about our organization and how we've had a long history with the World Bank. So For Love of Children was established in 1965. Yes, we are turning 57 this year, a little bit before my time. And our goal is to ensure that every student in Washington, DC, no matter what their zip code, their income, their skin color, their family status, has the options to achieve whatever they want to achieve post high school. And so we do encourage our students to attend college, but we do want to make sure that our kids can achieve whatever goals that they have in their lives. So we serve around 600 students a year. And we have two main programs: our neighborhood tutoring program, which is our one-on-one intervention tutoring. And I emphasize intervention because FLOC is not in the business of helping students get by. We want to make sure our students really do master the skills and understand what they're doing. So our neighborhood tutoring program serves 2nd through 12th grade students, and we focus on reading and math because those are the core subjects that students struggle with the most. And so if you're in the 6th grade, but you're only reading on a 3rd grade level, that's where we start you. And we want to make sure that you are comfortable, you master, and you can move forward with confidence. One of my greatest joys is to hear parents tell us that their child is raising their hand in class now, is answering questions, is feeling confident in a subject that they weren't feeling so confident the year before. Our second program is the City Leaders Program, and that is our college and career access program. And essentially we do project-based learning where we have students work with leaders in various industries. So we've had students who just published a book. We have film projects, photography projects, all different types of projects that students have working on, and that they can add to their resume so that when they're ready to apply for college, they have tangible projects that they can show to say, yes, I'm a leader and I have these skills. We also provide SAT prep, PSAT prep, college prep. Our students are paired with a coach in the 12th grade to work through the college process. And so how to choose a school, how to write your personal statement, FAFSA, all those wonderful, lovely things we've all gone through to get our education. And so we make sure that our students are supported through that process. But one of the most special things about FLOC, and one of the things that attracted me to FLOC, was that after they graduate from high school, we still support them through college and career. So we provide scholarships. workshops, networking opportunities, and we really do make sure that our students have what they need. So as you can see, 100% of our students have graduated from high school since 2010. We serve around 600 students a year, and we have over 490 volunteers a year. And honestly, we've had volunteers that serve with us for several years. Our longest standing volunteer has been with us for 25 years. Next slide, please. So Flock and the World Bank has had a long history. We first started partnering with the World Bank through the Community Connections campaign in 2003. And we've received over $135,000 in donations from the World Bank Community Connections campaign, which has been an incredible benefit to our organization. Additionally, we've had, since my tenure at Flock, 3 volunteers through our neighborhood tutoring program from the World Bank. So they've been paired with a student and worked with them through our neighborhood tutoring program, which has been absolutely incredible. And we've also been partnering with the Youth to Youth program since 2021. And recently we received over $4,000 in donations that went to support our annual readathon event. At Flock, we are very serious about literacy. And so this annual event encourages our students to read. And that money went directly to providing all of the materials and supplies and gifts that we needed to support that. Additionally, right now, the Youth to Youth program is hosting a three-part career series, including an interview workshop that just happened. And last night, they did a networking workshop for our students. And I got wonderful feedback already about how great that was. There's one more series coming up, and we're extremely excited about that. The one thing I would like to tell you about Flock is that we are very passionate about children. We're very passionate about the language that we use. We do not use the term low income when we refer to our kids. We use the term under-resourced, because it doesn't matter where you're going. It doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you're going. And so we really want to make sure that our kids are treated with all of the love and respect that they deserve, and they can achieve and do whatever they want to do in their lives. So if you'd like more information about Flock, or if any of you are interested in volunteering, we are always looking for volunteers. Please feel free to visit our website, which is on the screen. And I look forward to watching this event and learning more from the global education leaders and specialists on this call. And I'm very excited to attend. So Gigi, I will hand it back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brandolyn, and thank you for sharing these amazing volunteering opportunities. We are also at Whitefly, a volunteer-based organization, and it's amazing to see that Flock is doing an amazing work to help these students succeed. Our next speaker leads the Education Global Practice at the World Bank Group and has a lifetime experience in the field of education, having served as Minister of Education of the Government of Peru from 2013 to 2016. Please join me in welcoming Jaime Saavedra, who will tell us more about how to navigate the learning recovery process during the COVID-19 pandemic and the importance of investing and supporting learning recovery programs to build back better. Following Jaime's intervention, Maria Eugenia, a young professional passionate about education, will also provide us with an overview of the World Bank Group Education Recovery Package. Thank you so much, and over to you, Jaime.
Thank you very much, Ines. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you so much for organizing this. I will try to share my screen. Hopefully, I'm successful doing that smoothly. You never know. So let's see, just going to give me 1 second. Okay, so can you see? Oops. Can you see my presentation fine now? Super. Thank you very much. So so thanks again for this opportunity. I think it's I really feel, honored to have the chance to meet and share with young people from different parts of the world, and to have the opportunity of sharing with you some ideas about what has happened with education during this last 2 years, and also what's the way forward. What is that we need to urgently do, and what could be your role in what we need to do in education. But before doing that, I would like to very briefly share with you where were education systems before the pandemic, right? And I don't have time to give a really broad overview of all the characteristics of the global education systems and discuss where we were. So I'm just going to focus on one simple thing in helping us answering the question, are kids learning or not? And to do that, we came up actually in 2018, and we had some data for 2019 before the pandemic of this simple indicator, which is what's the share of 10-year-olds that cannot read and understand a simple text, which is what we call learning poverty, right? So if you think a little bit, this indicator, this share of 10-year-olds who cannot read a simple text by age 10 should be zero everywhere. All kids by the end of primary, roughly, should be able to read. This number should be zero everywhere. Learning poverty should be zero everywhere. Unfortunately, when we did this measure, which is consistent with several of the SDG 4 indicators, we found that this number for low and middle income countries was 53%. This is an extremely large number because if we are talking about all 10-year-olds in low and middle income countries, given the expansion of schooling systems, the majority of those kids are in school. There are still some kids who are not in school. We still have an access problem, but the majority of kids are in school. And despite that, many of them are not getting the even the foundational skills by the end of primary. But this problem is not exactly the same everywhere in the world. Learning poverty is in East Asia and the Pacific around 20%, a little bit lower in Europe and Central Asia. It's hovering around the average of that 53% in Latin America, a little slightly higher in the Middle East and in South Asia, and it's reaching 90% in Sub-Saharan Africa. This is an extremely high number. Everywhere, actually, right? If you're a policymaker in Latin America and you see that half of your children, half of your 10-year-olds are finishing primary education and cannot read well, that's a huge challenge for education systems. And all authorities in Latin American countries should be extremely worried. Now, if we go to Sub-Saharan Africa, that's even worse, right? The majority of the kids are not getting the foundational skills by the end of primary. And if they're not getting the foundational skills, then they are not able then to get many of the other indicators that we care in primary education. So this is an extremely complicated challenge. Reading is critical, is the foundation of all the other education outcomes we worry about. This isn't, but the key point here is that if a system is not attaining this, is not attaining learning poverty, is not guaranteeing that their kids can read, it's very unlikely that it's attaining all the other competencies that we care about. Math, social emotional skills, giving children in general all the competencies that they need for life. So this learning poverty, this very high learning poverty that we see across the world is morally unacceptable. All children have the right to education. For all children have the right to an education that gives them the skills that they need for a productive and for a fulfilling life, right? This is a basic human right that many of our children are not getting. And this is economically unjustifiable, right? Because globally, we do have the financial and the technical means to make sure that at least kids can read. We know we have the technical means. We know how a good school runs. We're not going to go into the details of that. I mean, we know when you need a great teacher, you need a good principal, you need to have some basic materials, but we know what to do, but we need to do it at scale because we need to do it for absolutely everyone. Aspiring to eliminate learning poverty is akin to the goal of ending hunger or ending extreme poverty, right? This should be that aspiration has to be at, all those aspirations have to be at the same level. And one thing that is worrying is this very high rate of learning poverty is an early warning that many of the other education goals included in SDG 4, in the Sustainable Development Goal 4 of the UN, are in jeopardy. And one thing I need to add here is that not only learning poverty is high, but unfortunately, it's not moving in the right direction, right? It's not that, well, it was high before the pandemic, but it's going down faster. Kids are really learning to read fast. Country systems are improving fast. Unfortunately, that's not the case, right? In many countries, we even see that learning levels are flat, are not improving. That was before the pandemic. Now, what was the impact of COVID-19? Well, unfortunately, school closures were just part of the arsenal that countries saw in order to fight the countries used in order to fight the pandemic. And in early 2020, we were just living a sea of ignorance. We didn't know really what worked and what didn't in terms of fighting the pandemic. And so schools were closed without much knowledge of the benefits of keeping school closed in order to fight right this COVID-19. And it was done without really a great understanding in many countries about what were going to be the costs borne by children and youth of these school closures. So if these school closures would have been of 1 month or 2 months, then at the end of the day, that's something that that country systems can easily recover. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The school closures were long and unequal. And I would say, this is an understatement. This slide should say extremely long, right? Overall, in the world, we had more than 280 days closed. It was much shorter in some regions of the world. It was much larger in other regions of the world. I saw OECD countries that in July or August of 2000 or September of 2020 were in a hurry to come back to school and started reopening the schools between the first and the second waves of the pandemic, and started figuring out that, look, there are ways to handle the pandemic that does not imply closing schools. Unfortunately, in other parts of the world, particularly Latin America and South Asia, that was not the case. Schools remained closed. And unfortunately, during 2021, while we were seeing that and other parts of the economy were opening, restaurants were opening, bars were opening, shopping malls were opening, offices were opening, schools stayed closed in many countries, which to a certain extent is ununderstandable. But why choosing education while at that time, but by 2021, we really had no evidence that closing schools was useful to fight the pandemic. Unfortunately, that was the case. The school systems continued closed for many months, and there are in many parts of South Asia and Latin America are they opening only now. Even a few countries like Philippines or Uganda, they just opened a few weeks ago, right? So it has been a huge and gigantic shock for our children. So then I go back to this number that I was telling you before. What happened with this 53%? This 53% that I mentioned was before the pandemic. Our simulations, given the very long school closures, and given that despite many countries implementing remote education programs, which were laudable. TV was back, radio was back in many countries. Teachers tried to communicate through WhatsApp with their children. There was some attempts of online education, but those attempts, were very heterogeneous and partially successful only. So given that the only partial success, I would say, of remote learning, and given the extremely long school closures, this 53% we projected to be 70% now. I mean, after these 2 years. And it's not only learning. We're seeing probably the worst education crisis in the century. We're seeing 13 million more girls that might be marrying earlier in this decade because of the pandemic. There are millions of additional students that are dropping out of the systems, either because they started working or because they are disconnected from the education experience. We have hundreds of millions of children who lost their main daily school meal, which happened in school. We have a large increase in depression and anxiety symptoms across globally, across all countries among children. And what we see is what I would say that is an inequality catastrophe. And what do I say that? And I won't go into the wealth of data that we already have, is that we have an inequality catastrophe across several dimensions, right? On one hand, let me start by the last one that you see in the screen. There's a potential inequality catastrophe by generation, in the sense that unless we do something quickly, this generation might see a huge loss in their learning, this 70% that I was referring to, that will then map right to a loss of earnings in the future that we calculated that could be equivalent to $17 trillion, which is losses in terms of future income flows for this generation, not for economists in general, for this generation, those kids who happen to have between 5 and 20 years old during these years. So unless we do something and rescue this generation from potential learning losses, given the shock that they have given, they will be doing worse than the previous generation and the generations to come, right? So that's one thing that should worry us. Second, we see an inequality across education levels or ages, because the potential to recover a little bit through remote learning and to learn a little bit by themselves was larger among older kids or kids in secondary education. In the other extreme, kids who had early child education age had no education stimulation at all. Think of the 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds who should have been in preschool, in pre-K during these 2 years. Early child education disappeared completely during these last 2 years. So it was worse for the younger kids than for the older kids. There is the inequality by socioeconomic level. Actually, I would say the top 10 or 20% in most countries were able to have some engagement the way we're doing it now through Zoom, and were able to connect with their teachers. And yes, they had some, not perfect, right, but some education stimulation. But in most countries, that's reserved for the better off. The majority of kids, the bottom 50, but the bottom 60, not the poorest, right? The majority of kids have very, very little, right, education stimulation. And also we see by gender, particularly, I mean, differences in dropouts rates, and we see differences in learning across among boys and girls that have different access, for instance, to a device, if there was a device at home, or that there are differences in the patterns of doing school household chores among genders. So it is not a worry about, I mean, the impact of the crisis in general, but it's a worry of a very unequal impact of this crisis. Let me start thinking about a few lessons of this pandemic. Some things that we have understood better, hopefully, right? And there are lessons for our societies of this a gigantic shock that we have lived in education the last 2 years. One is that education is a social phenomenon, right? Sometimes we have said, well, but let's give kids a tablet or a laptop and they will manage and they will be able to learn. Well, technology will help, but education is about interaction. The schools are a social space, and education is about interaction between teachers and the students, and between students and their peers. But second, we also learned that we need to close the digital divide, right? That now technology, who could be the great equalizer potentially today, is the great unequalizer, right? Because some kids had access to technology, others didn't. Technology can be very useful to make learning personalized and inclusive. Technology can be used in order to support teachers better, but technology has to reach everyone. So we see that the future is about a balance. It is about the balance between recognizing that education is about interactions but we can use technology to support those interactions. We can use technology to make kids, teachers more effective. The near future, I don't say the future in 10 years, the future starting tomorrow actually is about balancing the human factor in technology. And the other set of lessons that we have is that parents are key players in children's education. Like it or not, parents are protagonists of the education of the children. So we need, through public policy, to support more the role of parents as agents who can be critical in the education of their own children. And we need to strengthen the role of the home and what's happening at home and the role of the community. And when we say what happens at home is that we need to assure that there are the minimum and basic material conditions at home, like the existence of a device or the existence of books at home, right? Because that's a huge difference in quality of opportunity, that a kid goes back to home and there are no books at all, while other has a space to study and has plenty of reading material. As part of public policy, we need to worry that all kids have access to a book, right? And that will assure continuity, and that all this will assure a more resilient education system. We need to really act urgently to accelerate learning recovery. And the goal, as I was saying, is to avoid a permanent scar on this generation of students. I won't go into the detail of what countries can do, right? But we at the World Bank, we're working in a detailed learning recovery menu of policy options for countries to implement now. And that now is not a metaphor, it's literally now, right? In order to make sure that they give children the right opportunities that they need today. Remember that schools are gonna be receiving today a fifth grader, a set of theoretically fifth graders, but those fifth graders, some of them will have the competencies of fourth grade or third grade or second grade, right? Because they have lived through very different experiences during the pandemic. So teachers are going to be receiving children with very heterogeneous levels of learning and understanding, and also children who have gone through very complex social emotional experiences during these 2 years. So it's a gigantic burden on teachers. So we really need to help them. And some countries are understanding this, are understanding that kids will need a different type of support, and are doing stuff. And these are just examples, right? In Chile, for instance, they are consolidating the curriculum and they're focused on certain fundamental skills, right? From literacy, numeracy, and social emotional support. And they're implemented new pedagogical methods, right? For learning recovery within the classroom. In Gujarat, in India, they are measuring what are the learning gaps of each student. And they're measuring that even weekly, right? For teachers then to know where each of their students are today. And they're using technology in order to teach, to train their teachers and implement also remedial education. In Ghana, we see that there's aggressive multimodal back to school campaigns, because if schools are opening today, that doesn't mean that children will automatically return to school. That won't be the case. You can open the school and then many kids, particularly in secondary education, might just not return, because they're completely disconnected from the education system. So we need to be very aggressive into making sure that kids are back to school. That's something that we see that is happening in Ghana. And they're also having targeted instruction methods in order to teach at the level that each student is, not at the level that the curriculum dictates, right? That doesn't matter. What matters is where each child is. Let me close with saying what you can do. Right? I was saying what are some countries we're doing when we're talking. I was talking about the government of Gujarat or Chile, or Brazil or other countries in which we see that things are happening in Chile. Okay, that's what some of the governments are doing, but we need to make sure that we see this acceleration of learning, that we see this worry about recovering learning in absolutely all countries. Not in these few countries. We need to see that in all countries. So the question is, what is that you can do, right? And you can advocate to reopen schools. You can demand for more learning data. Countries need to know where are we in terms of learning, and if we have lost, how much we have lost, right? And you need to push for teacher support. You can sign up to be a tutor. You can volunteer your time to support parents. You can commit to work in the public sector. So many things that that you can do. And really, I mean, it is, I really do see a lot of hope in a lot of young people with which I've been talking in the recent weeks. Some of them just doing volunteer to support remedial education programs, because we all need to understand that we're living a huge learning crisis. We were living a learning crisis before, now it's worse, and really we need to do a lot in order to save this generation. But a lot of that is something that you guys can do. So let me stop there. Really thank you for these minutes. And now I know that Maria Eugenia, my colleague Maria Eugenia, will go into the details of what to do in the coming few months. Thank you very much. Over.
Yes, hello. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. It is an honor to be here. My name is Maria Eugenia Oviedo, and I'm a part of the Education Global Practice at the World Bank. I'm just pulling up my screen, and I will appreciate if you can just give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Thank you so much. So to get started, I am part of a team that has been working to produce guidance for countries on how to address the enormous impacts that COVID has had on schooling and learning, and that we just heard about from our director, Jaime Saavedra. The disruptions generated by the pandemic have led to enormous learning losses and exacerbated inequality, aggravating what was already a learning crisis. Without further action, future learning is at risk. We see in this graph how sharply school closures have derailed the pre-pandemic learning trajectories. You'll see in the red arrow, the way that learning levels sharply decreased due to the learning that didn't take place or that was forgotten during those long absences from school. As schools have reopened, it has been tempting to resume business as usual under the assumption that all children will automatically return to school and that once they're back in the classrooms, their learning will soon get back on track. This would be a mistake. As you can see here, with the current pace of learning losses will continue to accumulate. We believe that countries can mitigate and reverse these impacts if they have strong political will and use sound policy instruments. To avoid a permanent impact on the human capital accumulation of this generation, our proposed solution is for countries to adopt learning recovery programs consisting of a contextually appropriate mix of strategies. To guide countries in devising these programs, our team has put forth a framework for learning recovery that we call the RAPID framework, as it conveys the need for swift action on the part of countries. I'll begin with a quick overview before delving into each strategy. The framework begins with the idea that reaching every child, ensuring that he or she is enrolled in school and remains in school, is a prerequisite to learning recovery. In the same way, assessing current learning levels is a necessary tool for ensuring that instruction meets students where they are. The next three pillars focus specifically on what happens inside the classroom. Prioritizing teaching the fundamentals means streamlining or consolidating the curriculum so that the most essential and foundational skills are prioritized. Increasing catch-up learning means teacher professional development and the use of pedagogies that are known for accelerating learning. And finally, because of the enormous effect that COVID has had on child mental health and psychosocial well-being, it is critical to embed into our responses measures to safeguard their well-being holistically. The first pillar is about reaching and retaining every child in school. First, reopening schools and keeping them open is necessary for learning recovery. Learning losses during closures were significant, as we were just hearing about, because access and use of remote learning was vastly unequal. And even those with access to remote learning were not learning as much as they were in person. This shows the importance of keeping schools open. Second, early warning systems can be used to identify students at risk of dropping out and to implement measures to ensure their retention. Back to school re-enrollment campaigns can help enrollment rates, and it is important to communicate to parents that it is safe to send their children back to school, and also remind them of the value of schooling and learning. Finally, another strategy to boost enrollment includes cash transfers for families where financial struggles are a hindrance to enrollment. Some programs tie cash support to school enrollment, which has proven effective in places like Mexico and Brazil. Moving on to the next slide, really quickly, I'll talk about the importance of assessing learning. Determining the approximate extent of the learning losses can be done at a national or subnational level using large-scale assessments. Estimating how much learning was lost and what specific content was lost helps a country design appropriate learning recovery strategies. It helps them set a baseline against which progress can be tracked, and it can help identify regions, grades, or groups that need additional resources. Also, assessment at a classroom level can help teachers understand the current learning levels of their students and adapt their instruction accordingly. Next, we move on to prioritizing the fundamentals. It is important to ensure that this generation of students receives an education of a quality that is at least as good as that received by previous generations. However, we also know that students are behind where they should be at their grade. Adhering inflexibly to the curriculum, for instance, by teaching 5th grade level material to students who might still be at a 3rd grade level because of the pandemic, is just bound to be ineffective and drag them further behind. Therefore, countries can consolidate their curricula so that they cover the most important topics in the time that they have. And those topics should prioritize foundational learning like numeracy and literacy and conceptual prerequisites, those antecedents that students need to master before they're ready to move on to more complex topics. Many countries have done so quickly in the past 2 years. South Africa, which you'll see on this list, was one of the first to do so in mid-2020, announcing a prioritized curriculum that is valid for 3 years. Next, increasing catch-up learning, which means increasing the efficiency of instruction so that we get the most out of it in terms of learning. This is comprised of 3 main building blocks. The first is supporting teachers. Teachers need to be supported with tools, training, and coaching to assess students regularly, implement remedial strategies, safeguard the well-being of students, and gain skills in the effective use of technologies. Second, it's about evidence-based instructional approaches that have been used at scale to accelerate learning. Here you see 4. The first is targeting instruction to learning levels. This usually means dedicating a special hour of the day or a special time during the day to group students, not by their grade or their age level, but by their current level of proficiency as determined by an assessment. Structured pedagogy programs simply means giving teachers lesson plans, textbooks, and teacher guides that help make them more effective. Small group tutoring is self-explanatory. It means complementing regular instruction with personalized support. And finally, self-guided learning, which helps students progress at their own pace. A third policy tool is to simply expand the time that students spend learning. Some countries have added more days to their school calendar, while others have made use of summer school, for instance. And this additional time can be used to implement some of the strategies mentioned here. I want to just give you a quick sense of what these have looked like in person. The first is the case of Cambodia, which, following school reopenings, dedicated essentially 12 hours a month to doing what I was just talking about, grouping their students by the level of their proficiency using these new assessment tools they created, and providing differentiated teaching activities aimed at their level. And in the Dominican Republic, a pilot by the Ministry of Education that is now being expanded due to its positive results is pairing university students with disadvantaged students in secondary education. And this is one way, just as we were hearing about earlier, that youth can get involved in learning recovery strategies. The final pillar is about developing psychosocial health and well-being. We know that to protect learning and the well-being of children, we must address the impact that COVID has had on their mental health. Fortunately, we know that school-based mental health programs can be effective at improving well-being and learning. You see here different types of interventions with an example for each. For instance, you can embed psychosocial programming in schools, train teachers to provide support to students and to refer them to specialized services. You can provide remote psychosocial supports through channels such as helplines and hotlines, WhatsApp groups, even simple phone calls or other remote platforms. And finally, we must not forget about the well-being of teachers themselves. We must support teachers' own well-being and reduce their burnout and stress through interventions such as peer support groups, for instance. Now, just tying it all together, what are the steps for formulating a plan? This is a very simplistic look at it, but our proposal begins with understanding learning losses at a system level, as I was mentioning, and also measuring current learning levels at the classroom level. Once this is done, a country must establish what are its system's strengths and its weaknesses to understand what policy tools are actually feasible. Second, set a vision for learning, including setting learning goals in the short and the long term. Third, selecting the mix of policies that will be used, adapt them to that country's context, and develop implementation plans for each program. And finally, establish a plan to monitor implementation and early results in a way that is adaptable and allows for regular adjustments. Now, just as some concluding thoughts, we at the World Bank are producing tools that go into much greater depth than I have today. And a forthcoming publication will present this framework with a lot more operational guidance, evidence, examples that are current so that countries can see how other countries are approaching this. And finally, to end, I will say that we encourage countries to reopen schools, keep them open, and invest in learning recovery programs that will protect the educational rights of our current generation. Thank you very much for your time. And now I will stop sharing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jaime and Maria Eugenia. It's very interesting to see how youth should be at the center of the discussion when it comes to education and urging leaders to take action and make real commitments, specifically with the adoption of the learning recovery programs. Speaking of commitments, our next speaker is an education specialist with over 12 years of operational, analytical, and policy dialogue experience. Himdat by Yusuf is here with us to tell us more about her work and the interconnections between youth and education from middle income and fragility, conflict, and violence countries. Welcome, Himdat.
Thank you so much, Gigi, and thank you all for having me here today. It's very, very exciting to be part of this Y2Y event. And I've seen a few Y2Y events, and it's always great with the energy that it comes with and the networks. So as you mentioned, I work across regions actually now, currently working in the Middle East and North Africa regions. And today I wanted to bring up the topic of higher education, youth, and skills, and in particular, how education is really important in terms of ensuring that gainful employment, right? So when we look at the last few years, we've seen a lot of disruptions, a lot of changes. COVID has really shown a gap in learning, and how do you protect human capital, and more importantly, how do you prepare for tomorrow? But in preparing for tomorrow, I always say you have to look at what is happening today. And what is happening today is you have across many regions a situation where the economy is also changing, and more importantly, we're entering a new phase of trends within automation and rapid technological advances, collectively dubbed as the fourth industrial revolution, which is shifting the economic landscape and changing the nature of jobs and the profile of skills required in the labor force. The fourth industrial revolutions and the coming of the digital economy really offers countries an opportunity to accelerate the pace towards improved productivity, but and more importantly, providing youth with jobs and gainful jobs. As it's very well known, higher education and tertiary education has one of the highest returns to education, almost globally, 9% there's an increase in hourly earnings for every extra year of schooling. But how do we make sure that when you come out of college, come out of universities, you have the skill set that the labor market and the economy needs, of course, provided that the economy is producing the jobs that are required for tomorrow and for today. Most recently, the World Economic Forum report on employment has identified some very interesting areas that are more brain intensive than capital intensive. For example, biotechnology, health sciences, creative industries, new areas of computing, all driven by the rapid progress in Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, robotics, etc. So how does this all fit in with what we're doing at the World Bank, and how is higher education responding to the development needs? So before I get into that a little bit, I think it's also interesting to sort of talk about what it is with that you ensure that graduates gain employability skills. And one of the most important thing is the link between partnerships and the private sector, and ensuring that degree programs are developed in such a way that they're responding to what the labor market needs, that you're providing career guidance to youth in terms of the employability skills, in terms of cross-cutting skills, but also you're providing employment information options. With more information, you're able to know what career prospects and what areas you would like to go into. I always make a joke, like when we're talking about what colleges to go into, economists, they say, they're always sort of in demand. And I don't know if we're going to be there tomorrow, but this is something that we know that engineers and software engineers are, for example, very much in demand across things, from apps, from the software development, from financial management systems, e-services, all these things. So we may not have the jobs of economists in the future, but we know that we have software engineers. So as an economist myself, I think I have to think about the jobs in 20, 30 years where we will be. So with that background, I'd like to talk about two interesting programs. I'm currently sitting here in Tunisia, where we have the Tertiary Education and Employability Project, which looks at supporting the employability skills of youth in Tunisia. And the way that we are supporting the program is essentially providing bottom-up support, where universities submit proposals for competitive funding to provide what we call Program Appui Quality, which is PACS, which is a competitive fund, to provide career services, to develop co-constructed programs. For example, in the area of technology, there's a co-constructed program between the Rades Institute of Technology that focuses on microfinance and working with NGOs to improve financial inclusion. And at the same time, we have very interesting programs within, for example, tourism, where some of the regions are very well known for tourism, but ensuring that the hotel and tourism management industry are linked through training, through curricular development with the programs. And another example, of course, is within as we move towards climate change and the look towards solar energy and the skills required to transition into a more climate sustainable environment, you do need skills within power and electrical services that are climate friendly. So these programs are developed closely with the sustainable energy company of the country to train certified photovoltaic experts. So these are the sort of things that within higher education are really fundamental in preparing job opportunities and ensuring that youth are skilled in a way that are ready for the jobs of tomorrow. And as I said, the jobs of tomorrow are already here, as we're seeing within the fourth industrial revolution and within the climate change aspect. The second program that I'd like to talk about a little bit is, and this is a program that I worked on before that is currently ongoing and being led by my colleagues in the Africa region, is the Africa Centers of Excellence, which is one of our flagship programs at the World Bank within higher education. And the ACE project is really innovative in so many ways, but I'll talk about two ways that it's innovative. The first is it's cross-country, so it's cutting across countries. We're currently engaged within 10 countries in West Africa and another 8 countries in East Africa. And the idea is to establish regional centers of excellence, which provide specialized training to address regional development challenges. So what do we mean by here? It's, for example, when you look at the US, you have along the East Coast and the West Coast. For example, in the West Coast, a lot of the universities are very well known within ICT, as they're linked to the Silicon Valley industry. And in the same way, the ACE program, as it was developed on the regionality side of things, is to look at how do you manage to produce very high quality but relevant programs that respond to the challenges within the region in a way that is managed within the scarce resources that we have. And the ACE program came about, it's almost a decade now that it's been going, and it came about, the first one in West Africa. So I'll talk a little bit about what we call the ACE 1, in which we had about 22 institutions supporting programs in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, health sciences, and agriculture sciences. And what's really interesting here is the second innovation is the results-based financing approach of it, in which, of course, now a lot of our programs are very common to have results-based financing. But at that time, when the first series was being prepared, it was one of the first. And this has really been a factor of success and the factor for one of the reasons that we have such high impact. And one of the most important centers that has been supported is the Center of Excellence in Infectious Genomic Diseases, which was one of, during the competition, it came up as one of the top ones. And it sort of showed that through competitive funding, you really attract the best and the brightest towards putting in the scientific proposals. And this center was the first to, during the Ebola crisis, was one of the first that was really there. It's a center based in Redeemers University, and the acronym is ACEGID. And they were there to respond to the needs, not only in Nigeria on the Ebola testing, but also in Sierra Leone and Liberia. And therefore really showing that the education not only can help youth get jobs, but more importantly, the research and development aspect of it, because at the end of the day, you also need to have that scientific capacity to also address climate change, to also address health challenges. And what ACEGID was able to do was really phenomenal, even now with the COVID crisis. One of the most important things that need to take place is the sequencing of the virus in order to know where it is coming from. And the ACE in Nigeria was able to do the first sequencing of the COVID-19 virus in Nigeria back in March 2020. And it's now been designated center under the Africa Center for Disease Control to undertake this genome sequences within the African continent, as well as providing training to across the region, as well as North Africa, South Africa, and ensuring that knowledge and scientific capacity is being spread and shared across. So on the final thing that I'd like to just mention on the ACE is really the focus on STEM and the focus on increasing this STEM capacity within the continent. And we had a lot of, for example, almost 34% of the postgraduate population in Nigeria was funded under the ACE program. So this is something that is really important as countries look towards supporting education towards development challenges, but also employability. So I will stop for now and really thank you all for having me here today. I'll just leave with with a quote in Swahili, Asanteni sana. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Linda. It's really inspiring to hear more about your work and the intersections between technology, data, education, and how these areas will really dictate the future of jobs. It's also interesting to hear more about your work in the MENA region, especially as today the MENA Climate Week wrapped up and youth, climate, and the environment were at the center of the discussions. Before we get to our next speaker, we'd like to share a special message from the Undersecretary of Education at the Italian Ministry of Education, Senator Barbara Floridia, on Italy's Regeneration School Plan, a plan to bring about the ecological and cultural transition in schools as part of Italy's implementation of the UN 2030 agenda, allowing sustainability to be addressed in a systemic way, responding to the needs of today's and future generations.
Buongiorno a tutti e a tutte. Come sottosegretaria del Ministero dell'Istruzione, con la delega alla transizione ecologica e culturale delle scuole italiane, mi preme dire e sottolineare quanto importante sia per il nostro Ministero l'educazione alla sostenibilità. Abbiamo già introdotto nel curriculum scolastico l'educazione civica in tutti gli ordini di scuola, in ogni ordine e grado di scuola. All'interno dell'educazione civica è compresa anche l'educazione ambientale, oltre che l'educazione alla cittadinanza digitale. Però abbiamo deciso come Ministero di rinforzare, di accelerare questo processo educativo verso un nuovo modello abitativo, verso un nuovo modello sociale, e quindi abbiamo deciso di strutturare un piano sistemico nazionale, il piano Rigenerazione Scuola, per accompagnare e per aiutare le scuole ad andare verso questo cambiamento, questa transizione ecologica, ma una transizione che sia essenzialmente culturale. Il piano Rigenerazione Scuola offre alle scuole, a tutte le scuole italiane, risorse economiche, offre esperti in modo tale da poter accompagnare e arricchire le lezioni dei docenti o le attività laboratoriali che si realizzano nelle scuole con l'aiuto di esperti, di organizzazioni nazionali e internazionali, di enti pubblici, di enti privati, che possano in qualche modo rinforzare l'attività educativa. Inoltre il piano Rigenerazione si prende anche cura degli edifici, fa sì che attraverso anche le risorse del PNRR si possano modificare piano piano ed efficientare, oltre che a mettere in sicurezza, gli edifici scolastici e soprattutto predispone risorse per quelle che sono le aule verdi, le aule green, gli orti, anche gli orti biologici nei giardini delle scuole. Vogliamo anche aumentare la presenza dei giardini nelle scuole e la messa a dimora di alberi. E infine un altro pilastro del nostro piano Rigenerazione riguarda gli indirizzi di scuola. Non basta più solo sensibilizzare, bisogna acquisire competenze e conoscenze rispetto ai temi green e anche ai green jobs. E infine un pilastro fondamentale per il quale stiamo stanziando risorse e dando strumenti alle scuole è quello di sollecitare nuovi comportamenti abitativi, nuovi comportamenti rispetto alla mobilità scolastica, l'alimentazione e tutto ciò che riguarda il nostro essere cittadini. È importante per noi accelerare questo processo di transizione verso il superamento del Westocene, verso il superamento dell'antropocene, per andare verso una cultura che superi il concetto dello scarto, e quindi parlare di economia circolare nelle scuole significherà parlare di una cultura circolare che non contempla il rifiuto, dove il rifiuto, così come l'ecologia, che è la scienza delle relazioni in fondo, ci insegna, non esiste il rifiuto, ma ogni cosa, così come ogni persona, ha e deve avere una sua dignità e una sua collocazione in qualunque fase della sua vita.
That was a very inspiring message on the interconnections between education, sustainable development, and the efforts that Italy is making to put youth at the center. Now, I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Herman Escorcia, the Director of Innovation at Virtual Educa, which has been a long-standing partner of Y2Y. They are represented today by Herman, who will tell us more about the shift from the information-based society towards an imagination and creativity-based society. Over to you, Herman.
Thank you very much. And of course, our best greeting for everybody around the world following us. Departing from what the strong point made by Dr. Jaime Saavedra about the catastrophe, I would like to present now that emerging from that, we have to look at tomorrow with new ideas for the youngsters to create new opportunities for the development of the future, and seeing the future in a very different way. Let me share with you some of the ideas with this presentation, following a little bit the idea of a imagination-based economy. Let me just say, oh, it was at the last slide. Here we are. The idea of an imagination-based economy departs from meetings we have been doing over 25 years with Virtual Educa, bringing together leaders from education, corporations, industry, governments, and academia, and trying to create innovation for a better view for the future of the education. Recently, we have added a combination of the strategy for education and the creation of new citizenship, with a lot of help from the youngsters, particularly from Y2Y association with Virtual Educa in several events and participations. The idea now is that we have been following new strategies. Excuse me, I have to move the presentation again. Yes. So as I was saying, the point is that emerging from this catastrophe, I would say we are driving into what we could call an art world, because we have to rethink the organizations and we have to reimagine the scenarios. Rethinking the organization, we will have to take actions, reset, employ, apply a little bit of resilience in our recovery and return, of course. But most of our effort has to be made around redesigning the future, thinking again, redefine, of course, the skills. The skills we will need for this recovery are quite different from the ones we have had before. So we are driving into a full reinvention of education and citizenship. The idea also is that it became from forces that were related to the emerging of exponential technologies. Some years ago, it started as a movement, and I'm not going to explain the full line of technologies, but to point for everyone here, the idea that those technologies have been creating families, and those families of technologies are creating synergies. And the emerging point is that we are having now opportunities and developments like never before. Even some of them were not intended, are just a result of merging some of the technologies together and providing new kind of services and opportunities. One of them is, of course, the family of mixed realities. It started with virtual reality for video games and film, but then for coming from another different technologies, augmented reality came at the same time. And now the mixture of these two technologies has created a family that makes for us somehow a blurring frontier between the artificial reality and the, let's say, real reality. But this mixture is going to become very important in the society of the future. I will explore a little bit further this in a minute. Of course, we have this artificial intelligence family. We all know about the possible applications and things that are already happening in a very surprising way, taking control of many of important issues in the society today that will drive us into further developments that are mainly based not on artificial intelligence, but on the intelligence of the people that is driving this kind of movement, technology movements. Another set of the exponential technologies is creating a family. Internet of Things, you know, this idea of having chips interconnected, you know, with several different objects that could be controlled with an application in a cellular phone or something like that, is creating possibilities that if you add the family of technologies dealing with big data or cloud computing, could also drive into thinking about intelligent cities with the ability to react to the behavior of the citizenship. So this idea is very important in terms of how Internet of Things will become a dominant technology in the years to come. It is expected to be the human activity that is showing the largest growth rate in the world for the next 10 years. And of course, all other technologies dealing with the connected robotics family, autonomous manufacturing, and 3D printing. All those technologies were the departing point to create for us now an important observation. With this graphic, let me illustrate the brand value growth by year in several of the most important companies in the world. And, you know, in this travel made by this technology, you can observe now that most of the more valuable brands in the world are enterprises that are not having big investments, let's say, in manufacturing plant or employees or something like that. Many of these companies are very small in terms of the actives they have for the development of the corporation. And most of them are selling products that are not tangible. Those two differences allow us to think that the value of these companies is very important because they are mainly based on mind-developed products instead of raw materials processing or industrialized goods. That difference created an economy, this economy we are living today. And of course, we are now accessing all those kind of corporations and businesses and governments and academia under buttons we have in our own cellular phones that are expecting us to make a click and engage us into an offer or a service or something that we need. This creates the opportunity to a new development that happened during the pandemic time. The largest investment made during the pandemic was made by connectivity. With the announcement of the learning satellite constellations that are driving to a smart autonomous murmuration of these satellites, with the announcement of the Starlink constellation that announces 32,000 satellites in orbit to allow that every point in the Earth will be connected. That's difficult to say. Is a promise that is to be fulfilled, let's say, they say in 2 years or something like that, allowing people all over the world to be connected. If that happens, you know, this is very important because in addition to this announcement, Amazon made a similar one because that was the company with the most growth during the pandemic, because they had to distribute everything in many countries of the world. So they are announcing a creation of another satellite networks to help them distribute the last mile packages around the world. So with all these areas, connectivity is going to change fundamentally in the next few years. And that creates an opportunity to directly impact education in the future and to allow our minds to be connected, creating wonderful things like never before. Changes in geopositioning or prospection and tracking, all these things are going to change. And this connection allows us to start thinking seriously about connected talent. And we have like an opportunity like never before. We have powerful tools to connect powerful minds. Here is a little graphic we made with a study here for the city of Mexico, where I live now, although I am from Colombia, that we have some critical problems and we have the talent. And we see with this radar that in most of the cases, we have the problem with no talent around, like in this area. Or we have some talent that is not connected with the problems. So connected talent is becoming something very special. Now cities can become innovation connected cities. We are having a project being designed now with the mayor of Medellin in Colombia to create an alliance of cities to connect talent, education, and citizenship. These connections create access for a new economy. For example, this is a case replacing the old economy based on Madrid, Paris, and Berlin, moving into the south of Spain, the south of France, north of Italy, with a new axis of creative industries. This is becoming very, very important. So for you to remember, as Gigi said at the introduction, what I'm proposing is that we are moving at this moment from an information-based society in which it is clear for us to have Google, Facebook, Twitter around. We are moving into an imagination society. And it's a prophecy that was made before by Nicolas Negroponte, the former director of MIT Media Lab, that is saying the whole society is moving from atoms to bits. And this imagination economy is being created as a first evidence that this movement is taking place right now. And we have to prepare education for tomorrow, considering this aspect in the definition. So one of the ideas is that, of course, what we are living now is an information abundance, but this creates an attention poverty. And attention then becomes the most important driving force for the economy in the future. the attention of the people. Now you see the fight of all these buttons in your cellular phone because they are all fighting to get your attention for nanoseconds, and then to bring your attention and create a retention. They have nanoseconds to give you a glimpse of what they do or can do for us and retain your attention. So it's becoming a war of attention. Attention economy then is the pillar for this imagination economy we are having. The first evidence we are getting into is all these mixed realities that I have already mentioned. All this idea of having interaction, which is a combination of the real reality in which we see and perceive perfectly, and technology created or technology based realities that are going to be mixed. So we will have situations like this in which we will have an interaction between a computer created reality and a real person interacting with that. It was considered something like a utopia or science fiction, but with the announced last year of metaverse, it becomes evident that it's taking this path for the future. For all those that know a little bit for that, I'm not going to explain this area of metaverse. You all know about this. But, you know, it's moving for in a simple infrastructure, redefining the human interface, and then moving into the creation economy, discovery, and experience. We are all now understanding that, for example, education is becoming mostly experience-based learning processes than repetition of information that we did before. And to consider all these aspects, Virtual Educa is organizing, and I'm extending all of you participating in this conference, Y2Y and everyone else, to the Summit of Education being organized for Medellin in October this year, and then a forum on citizenship being organized for November this year in Lisbon, with the announcement of the Cities Alliance for Innovation, Education, and Citizenship. If we have to point tomorrow, we have to become strategic in our thinking. And United Nations, World Bank as part of that, has been promoting for several years now the 5P strategy, which is take care and be strategy thinking about the planet, about the people, prosperity, peace, and partnership. So I leave you with this message: pay attention to the emerging imagination economy, because we are going to live, we're going to have in the radar and in the scenario things like meta or metaverse that is starting today. Give them 10 years, as we did with Google. In 10 years from now, this is a tomorrow we are creating now. We have to be prepared, develop the skills, and create new options. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gigi, and all the Y2Y coalition. Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Herman. At this point, there's one thing we can keep in mind. Today, we are facing indeed many challenges, but the future of education is also full of wonderful and multiple opportunities,
yes,
such as these interesting shifts you've just shared. As we're coming to the end of our panel, I'd like to introduce Flavia Bedix, the Y2Y Youth Voices Program Brazil chapter lead. With over 9 active chapters across the world, the Youth Voices program has been connecting with young people on the ground over the years. And Flavia is here today to tell us more about the work and experiences that the Brazilian chapter has been leading in the country. Welcome, Flavia.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Flavia. I am speaking on behalf of Youth Voices Brazil. I really wanted to take the opportunity to share a little bit about the challenges and the solutions that we're trying to design as the chapter of Youth Voices located in the country. And so I think today the overall idea is to share with you a little bit of what we do, but also the challenges that we encounter and how these challenges in youth employment are connected to the education of the future that we spoke so far, and spoke really nicely. And so when we talk about youth employment in Brazil, I think the first thing that I wanted to share with you is the current scenario that we have in the country. We currently have about 12 million young people, which is approximately 30% about our youth population that is considered NEET, which means that they are not in employment, they're not in education, and they are not in training. This number is very severe. It's a number that really shows how deep the education crisis that we have in the country is. And in fact, it has been aggravated by the COVID-19 crisis. The three headlines that I bring here, although in Portuguese, they really show how COVID-19 really deepened the numbers of NEET young people, how more and more young people failed or perhaps weren't able to join the labor market or education or to maintain themselves in one of these places. It also talks about how COVID-19 really influenced and negatively impacted youth's mental health. And it also talks about how the fact that many of the jobs that were laid off during the pandemic were entry-level jobs and mostly accessed by young people. And so we really see that the challenges that we have in regards to creating an education of the future are already present in our day-to-day lives, not only because of COVID, but aggravated by COVID as well. Under this scenario, this is where we as the chapter in Brazil, as Youth Voices, we've been trying to navigate and we've been trying to create a buffer or design solutions that can mitigate this chaotic environment. And so we say that we exist in Brazil to contribute to fight the Brazilians' productive exclusion and to really access the root and try to eradicate this scenario. And we do that through three different ways: advocacy, research, and training. We believe that this is a cycle where each of these pillars are connected. And so as we convey research, we use this research to promote advocacy campaigns, to talk to public leaders, private leaders, to try to change their opinions or to really design policies that will be effective. And we also try to address this by really trying to empower young people so that they can be in charge of their future. They can have access to skills and opportunities that our educational system and our structural system, unfortunately, weren't able or enough to give them. And so what I wanted to share with you in the last few minutes are 5 challenges that we have encountered in our research, in our practices, in regards to how we can connect and how we can ensure that the education of the future also communicates to the future of jobs. And so when we talk about these challenges, we talk about schoolwork transition, entrepreneurship as a means for productive inclusion, training in 2 different ways: technical and social emotional skills, and lastly, data-driven policy, which is based on evidence. And so to start with schoolwork transition, here we're trying to secure that this transition for those students that leave high school or leave an educational training, a vocational training, is also smooth towards the labor market. And we've seen here that the lack of experience that sometimes, or the lack of necessary skills that educational training sometimes offer, really makes it really troubling for students to be able to smoothly join the labor market. So much so that we see that sometimes the failure to join it in a formal way leads them to join in an informal manner. And especially during times of crisis, economic crisis or sanitary crisis, we see that this lack of a smooth transition between school and work causes many students to drop off, or causes many students to, instead of think of finding a formal job, to start in informality. Here, we also see the need to help students design a career project, a life project, where they can think long term, where they don't have to make fast-paced decisions based on short-term needs, and they can really be criterious and selective about the opportunities that they want to encounter. And so I wanted to share one of the initiatives of our partner organizations called Galena. This is a startup that focuses in low-income young people, and it trains the young people, despite whether they've had an educational background or not, to really be able to navigate entry-level positions, and not necessarily only based on technical skills that they will need, but also based on soft skills, be that communications or navigating through Google Drive or Slack or other technology tools that we use today in the business environment and that we are not usually taught them in school, at least not in Brazil. The second challenge is inclusion via entrepreneurship. How can we make sure that besides joining the labor market through a formal contract, we can also do it through entrepreneurship, and do so because we want and not because we need. We have this number that about 88% of young entrepreneurs in Brazil, they start a business because they need to and not because they want to. This is where they're trying to promote entrepreneurship to survive and not to innovate and create something new. And so how can we really make sure that this is not the case anymore? How can we design an educational system where entrepreneurship becomes a possibility, an opportunity, and not a necessity? I think this is interesting, and we talk about this as a benchmark with what the state of São Paulo is doing. They are promoting this environment, this co-working space called Teia, where people can go and use free infrastructure, coffee, Wi-Fi, computers, technology. But more than that, they can talk to each other, they can share their business ideas and get feedback and co-create and have this exchange environment so that they can really design entrepreneur models that benefits them. The third one is training in regard to technical skills. And here we really think about how can we close the gap between the technical skills that the labor market has been requiring and the technical skills that we've been forming people in schools. How can we make sure that we can actually address the technology gap that we have today for developers, data scientists, UX and UI? We know that the future of jobs is coming. We know about automation. We know about the future careers that we may have. How can we connect that? How can we make sure that schools are really preparing us for that? And so in Youth Voices, we tried to engage in this discussion, in this reflection, and we created a program called Boosting Your Future in English. And one of the modules that we have within this program is a Data Analysis 101. It's a 8-hour program, but that it really tries to introduce students to the basics of reading data, analyzing data, and understanding data. And although this is quite introductory, our goal here is to really make sure that students can have a taste for this skill, whether they're going to a technology field or not. Fourth, and very important, is also training in regards to social emotional skills. How can we make sure that students, and not students, just young people in general, they are really absorbing these skills, intelligent emotional skills? And this is a challenge because, different from training, this is not something that you acquire through an essay or through a presentation per se. This is something that sometimes we need to be a bit more intentional on how to acquire these skills. And so within Boosting Your Future and also Employed Youth, another program that we have within Youth Voices, our objectives here have been to empower the youth, to make sure that they are doing civic engagement, communication, mentorship opportunities, to make sure that they find links between the experiences that they've had in their lives and to these buzzwords that we have to address social emotional skills like resilience, communication, leadership. We've all have gone through experiences that have made us more emotionally intelligent. So how can we really have a sense of ownership over them and talk about them as something that made us better professionals? And lastly, we have data-driven policy-based evidence. How can data-driven policy based on evidence, excuse me. So how can we make sure that we are making decisions, we're creating policy, we're creating programs that are really talking to the numbers and are really making sure that we are going towards a better and a more sophisticated direction. And so what we try to do here is to really use a data analysis program that we designed and connect it to the open data day that we have at Youth Voices once a year. We designed this program where we use R with people who want to sign up, young people, so that we can lean towards the open data sets that the Brazilian government has and understand what's the current panorama that we have on youth employment in Brazil. I think in general, these were some of the main thoughts, main challenges, opportunities that we've encountered. Some of the little reflections that we also wanted to share with you on how to build a bridge between the future of education, the future of jobs, and how can we really make sure that as we train and as we prepare students, we are doing so for the next steps in their lives. So thank you so much for listening. And please do let us know if you have any questions, if you want to know more about Youth Voices, we would love to chat with you.
We appreciate Flavia sharing about the Youth Voices Brazil chapter, the actions and impacts that they're taking today, which contribute to decreasing the high number of students who are not working nor studying, as Flavia mentioned. We are a bit over time, so just want to keep the question and answer portion as we promised. We have one question that we'd like to start with HIMDOT. From a registrant, they were asking if you can please tell us more about how we can help students in remote or conflict-stricken areas with limited or no access to 21st century technologies.
Thank you, Gigi. That's an excellent question. So one of my other hats that I wear at the bank is I'm an EdTech fellow. So looking at how we can use technology for education, improving education. So the most difficult and yet most challenging type of context to implement EdTech is within FCV, but it's also $100 children in a classroom, underqualified or unqualified or unpaid teachers who are community teachers who are responding to the community needs. So given this context, technology solutions such as tablets to children for self-directed learning in environments, although not a first best solution because you cannot replace teachers, is still an important resource for children in such a context. So there are several examples that are currently out there, and they're sort of really from the which was launched in 2014, is an innovative challenge that looked at how to provide learning to children that don't have access to learning tools. And XPRIZE basically looks at learning software that empowered children to learn. And it was very interesting to see how that worked, but it really responding directly to the question. It's very simple. Use of all technologies, I think, is the most appropriate. So all technologies like radio, television, to reach students in remote villages, but also when we use these technologies, use them in an interactive radio that is supported, for example, by SMS, or the use of promoting literacy and learning through mobile phones. So these are some of the ways. Of course, I'm happy to share some more examples, but in the interest of time, I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Himdat. We have another interesting question, and this time I'm going to turn to Herman. In the coming years, will virtual education replace face-to-face education?
This is an interesting question that everybody is now dealing with. Virtual Educa is creating all these spaces for discussion with leaders all over the world to deal with this particular issue. In my own view, the idea is that we created the opportunity to have this virtual education using new tools and all these things as, in my first view, as a reduction of the gap. So there are communities that with the old systems and all these things had no chance to access good quality education. Virtual education is creating this bridge, although the lack of technology creates a gap. So in between gap and bridge, we have the future more driven to have all this connection, as I mentioned, all these possibilities with new technologies to create experience-based learning instead of repeating information. So the new technologies will make the part. But Jaime mentioned during his presentation that, of course, the human contact, the relationship between people, the social tissue that has to be created is also very important. So in my view, we will have combinations of that for the future. Remember that these things that I mentioned, like metaverse and all these new ideas, will take place as opportunities for learning in the next 10 years. So if we are thinking in building an education for tomorrow, we have to consider that the technology-based approach is going to become very helpful and very important in increasing the quality of education and in reducing the gaps for communities that had no chance before, and we will have the opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Herman. That's a very interesting point, which really builds off your presentation and really relating again to the future of education. We're in the final minutes of this event, and I would like to take this opportunity on behalf of the entire Y2Y communications, events, and partnerships team to say thank you to all of our speakers and attendees joining from different corners of the world. This session reinforced the need to put young people at the heart of the discussions on investing in education to really make sure we capacitate the future generations with the knowledge and skills they need, and that we ensure a brighter future for them all. And we just really want to thank you for participating today.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Himda. Thank you, Herman. And we'll share the recording not only on our Y2Y community space, but also with all the speakers and panelists and on different social media, so that all the insightful words that were shared here can be continued to share with other attendees who couldn't join. Thank you, guys.
Applauses to Y2Y.